somehow they transcend into tragedy.
Hello again, friends. We all agreed on that term during our last outing, so no need to make it awkward this time around. So, welcome back to Between the Dial, a project where we attempt to plot a long, strange roadmap through the dark heart of Los Angeles, in the hopes of uncovering a hidden geography that sits right atop our own. A hidden geography that informs the films we love and the town that made them. Now that is out of the way, I have heard from a few of my new friends, and the general consensus seems to be that I am a little too focused on Hollywood specifically, and even more specifically on the Sunset Strip. There is a reason for that, and it's because I feel that the Strip is a sort of microcosm that reflects Hollywood as Hollywood would like to see itself. A sort of lawless, non-stop party where artists become millionaires and everyone stays young and beautiful. One of my favorite new bars is on the Strip as well, called the Bar Next Door. They haven't paid me to say that, it's just a bit of free advertising. It's cozy and beautiful, and they have great cocktails. But alas, I have heard your complaining, and so today we will be traveling out of Hollywood and on to the flip side of the coin. If Hollywood is what people think of when they think of Los Angeles, then downtown is the sort of gritty urban hellscape that Hollywood depicts on film. Or to put it more simply, Hollywood is the film and downtown Los Angeles is the noir. So, let's take a drive down Old Broadway. The Los Angeles Broadway, which is a lot more like the Broadway from that Goo Goo Dolls song than it is the one in New York. What was at one point a bustling hub of movie palaces and vaudeville theaters is now a bunch of shuttered movie palaces and vaudeville theaters. Or movie palaces and vaudeville theaters turned into jewelry stores, or movie palaces and vaudeville theaters turned into churches, etc., etc. We'll start on 7th and pass the Warner Theater, which was originally built in 1920 as a vaudeville theater. It is now a jewelry store. A jewelry store that anchors the jewelry district in downtown Los Angeles. From here, we'll take a right on Broadway and just take a look. We will pass a great many theaters in various states of operation. Some, like the Orpheum, are actually still theaters, but instead of movies, they play host to concerts. We will pass the Warner Theater, which was actually the first movie theater in Los Angeles to be wired for sound. But the one I want to stop at is at 307 South Broadway, and it is the $1 Million Theater. Sorry, Sid Grauman's $1 Million Theater, which was the first theater that he built in Los Angeles. It opened in 1917 with the premiere of William S. Hart's The Silent Man, and was the first proper movie house built in Los Angeles, at a time when downtown was the center of the movie industry, and Hollywood was simply a little village where you couldn't buy alcohol. It was designed by architect Albert C. Martin, who also designed the Mayco department store building on Miracle Mile. The one with the large gold cylinder that's now a part of the Academy Museum. It's right across the street from the light where Biggie was murdered, though not sure if that helps or hinders the wayfinding, but... Anyway, the theater sits just north of 2,300 people and had office space built above, which was first occupied by Edison Co. Appropriate for those attentive listeners who recall our earlier episode on the birth of cinema. William Mulholland had an office there as well, and it's appropriate that they would occupy the same space, since, 1, Edison was responsible, though indirectly, for bringing filmmaking to Los Angeles. You see, Edison, in the super simplified version of the story, had a patent monopoly on the technology used to make and exhibit motion pictures. And anyone looking to make motion pictures outside of the Edison Trust were hit with copyright violations left, right, and center. Edison also hired mobsters to bust up productions who refused to cease and pay up. Essentially, independent filmmaking was untenable if you were within the reach of Edison's West Orange studio. So the indies decamped to Los Angeles, where they were far from Edison and his goons. The weather and cheap labor weren't bad either. And thus, Harvey and Dido Wilcox's 120-acre ranch that they purchased in 1886 and named Hollywood became the go-to for independent filmmakers at the dawn of the medium. The other man in the offices above the $1 Million Theater, William Mulholland, was, in a much more direct way, responsible for making Los Angeles the sprawling metropolis that it is today. William Mulholland was born in Belfast, Ireland, just like the Titanic, on September 11th, 1855, and at the age of 15 he served in the British Merchant Navy. His journey to America started in New York, but he very quickly headed west. Not to California, but to Michigan, where he worked in a lumber camp. He found himself back in New York after a brief stop in Ohio to reconnect with his brother in 1876, and the two of them stowed away on a ship bound for Los Angeles. They were, however, found out in Panama and forced to leave the ship. Then, to avoid paying the $25 gold fare to cross the isthmus, they proceeded to walk over 47 miles through jungle to the city of Balboa from Cologne, where they were able to find work on a ship bound for San Francisco, in which they arrived in 1877. From San Francisco, young William made his way to the small town of Los Angeles, which at the time had a population of about 9,000 people. He got a job there as a zeniero, which is a person who tended the town's irrigation ditches, which would become the thing he would more or less devote the next 50 years of his life to. While essentially working as a ditch digger during the day, Mulholland would spend his nights studying geology, hydraulics, and mathematics. He was trying, in his self-taught way, to master his field. And that, mixed with his strength of character, whatever that means, led him through the ranks of the town's water systems from ditch tender to supervisor to foreman to superintendent. In fact, he was the Los Angeles Water Department's first superintendent, a position essentially created for him. In 1880, just 3 years after arriving in California, William Mulholland supervised the laying of the first iron water pipeline in Los Angeles. But if we are to credit him for just one thing, it would have to be the power of vision above all else. For he, perhaps more than anyone else, saw the untapped potential of Los Angeles to become a major metropolis, if only there was a way to terraform and bring water to all of the underdeveloped land north of the Hollywood Hills. In the valley. The visionary that he was, he began a public works project to irrigate the land. But he wasn't alone in this project of making the valley what it is today. To tell that story, though, let's backtrack a bit and talk about a man named Isaac Newton Van Nuys. Because this Isaac Newton was a key player in the valley's transformation from farmland to suburb. Van Nuys was born into a family of farmers in New York, but sought a warmer life out west, and in the Napa Valley he met another farmer, and another Isaac, by the name of Isaac Lankershim. Lankershim was in the process of buying 60,000 acres of land in the San Fernando Valley from a man named Pio Pico, and Van Nuys jumped at the opportunity to get in on the deal. So he invested and moved to Los Angeles, and married Lankershim's daughter. The two Isaacs made a decent fortune growing wheat, but by the time Lankershim died in 1882, Van Nuys was interested in getting out of the farming business, so he sold all of those acres to a group of men who were surprisingly anxious to buy. Surprising because these were not farming men. They were more captain of industry types, such as H.J. Whitley, Harry Chandler, and of course, General Moses Hazeltine Sherman. You see, Sherman, concurrent to the irrigation project, was looking to buy up large tracts of cheap land in the valley, almost as if he knew that that land was about to become worth a lot more money once irrigated on a large industrial scale, far beyond that was needed to grow humble valley wheat. That could be because quote-unquote General Sherman got himself a position on the board of water commissioners, and as such was privy to insider knowledge that he then used to swindle those dirt farmers out of their land for pennies an acre. So Sherman and his buddies proceeded to buy out Isaac Newton Van Nuys and other surrounding farmers, and those buddies, which at this point could perhaps be referred to as a syndicate, would become the fathers of the San Fernando Valley as we know it today. Now, I'm not certain that William Mulholland was in on this with them, but he was in the middle of running a bit of a scam of his own. Because the idea of bringing water to the valley is just an idea until you can find the water. For that water, William Mulholland turned his sights to the Owens Valley, a lush agrarian town watered with runoff from the Sierra Nevada mountains. Between 1902 and 1905, William Mulholland proceeded to trick the residents of the Owens Valley into not developing their own waterworks by claiming that they themselves were developing an irrigation system for the Owens Valley. But what they were really doing was buying up the water rights for Los Angeles for almost nothing. When the residents of Owens Valley found out, they reacted pretty violently, at times even resorting to dynamite in an attempt to sabotage the aqueduct. This conflict was referred to as the Water Wars, and if there is any question as to who won, I ask, which city have you heard of? Los Angeles or Owens Valley? After 5 years of construction in November 1913, William Mulholland saw the completion of his crowning achievement. a 233-mile aqueduct that brought torrents from the Sierra Nevadas to the San Fernando Valley. At the opening ceremony, William Mulholland kept his speech simple. He said, "There it is. Take it." And we've been taking it ever since. That said, it wasn't all crowning achievements for William Mulholland. From his office at the $1 Million Theater, he oversaw the construction of the project that would end his career, and arguably his life. The project was a dam along the aqueduct of the San Francisco Canyon that would store all of the excess water siphoned from the Owens Valley. At midnight on March 13, 1928, just 12 hours after safety inspections and a seal of approval from William Mulholland himself, the St. Francis Dam failed catastrophically. 5 minutes after the breach, a wall of water approximately 120 feet high poured into present-day Santa Clarita, destroying a power station and cutting power to the San Fernando Valley. The flood continued, eventually carrying bodies and debris all the way to the Pacific Ocean. All in all, at least 431 people were killed. William Mulholland accepted full responsibility for the disaster, and the resulting guilt plagued him for the next 7 years until he died in 1935. He would say, quote, "If there was an error in human judgment, I am that human," end quote. And at the end of the inquest, it does seem that he indeed was culpable, as bad topography and poor design were blamed for the dam's failure. Mulholland lived the rest of his life in relative seclusion. He began an autobiography, but abandoned it. His legacy lives appropriately at the unofficial border between the Hollywood Hills and the San Fernando Valley, in the form of Mulholland Drive. A great road for a night drive while contemplating the complicated legacy of a man whose exploitation of resources gave us the San Fernando Valley, and whose cavalier attitude and perhaps lack of formal training led to his downfall. Sid Grauman's $1 Million Theater ceased its position as the place for big movie premieres when Sid Grauman endeavored to build 2 new theaters in Hollywood, the Egyptian and Chinese theaters, built in 1922 and 1927 respectively, effectively making Hollywood the official capital of the movie business. What then became of downtown Los Angeles was something far darker. Bringing water to the valley led to increased suburbanization, which kicked into overdrive following World War II, as returning soldiers found that the ease of freeway travel meant that one did not need to live in the city to work in the city. As such, downtown Los Angeles became much more of a 9-to-5 city, as we call it. The growing Skid Row did not help matters either. Parsing the history of Skid Row is a project in and of itself, but the area began to coalesce in the 1930s during the Great Depression, when people fled the Dust Bowl for Los Angeles but found that there wasn't enough work to go around. Those people then began to set up temporary housing near the train yards, and thus birthed the permanent underclass of Los Angeles that exists today. During World War II and the Korean War, Los Angeles was the shipping off and return port, and those returning with PTSD and addiction issues soon found a home in that area as well. Then in 1981, Ronald Reagan signed the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act, which discontinued funding and support for community mental health care centers, which in turn led to the closure of said centers, many of which were located near Skid Row. The result of which saw many of those patients simply turned onto the street. All of these factors contributed to the 50 city blocks in downtown Los Angeles with roughly 4,400 unhoused people who live in them. These things have not only made the revitalization of downtown difficult, but also created a breeding ground for serial killers. Those who know that doing harm to members of a marginalized population is a good way to avoid getting caught. It's also a place for those same individuals to blend into the fray and avoid detection. Those like Richard Ramirez, who used this perfect storm to move into suburbia to commit horrific acts of murder and torture, and then slip back into the anonymity of the chaos of downtown. He spent a great deal of his time in downtown Los Angeles, up the street from the $1 Million Theater at the Hotel Cecil, which, if you're listening to this, is a place you are probably more than familiar with. But either way, let's take a drive up to 640 Main Street and check it out. It has a really nice Art Deco exterior that definitely has the power to transport you back to a bygone Los Angeles when you allow your eyes to leave the street level. So let's all do that for a moment, shall we? It's also full of ghosts, I should say. Now, assuming that we don't need to go over Richard Ramirez and his many crimes, the Hotel Cecil, even if you remove him from the equation, has enough grisly history to rival the Suicide Bridge in Pasadena. Check out the first couple episodes of this podcast to hear more about that. The Cecil, however, opened in 1924 on Main Street in what would become downtown's present-day Skid Row. But at the time, it was a sort of middle-class, commuter, business traveler type hotel. Then, as the Great Depression wore on the area, as I mentioned earlier, by the 1940s, the hotel had transitioned to more of a budget lodging space, and then eventually it became a hostel, and then finally a rooming house. Those transitions were catalyzed throughout the 1930s by a slew of sudden and at times unexplained deaths, beginning in November 1931 with a 46-year-old man named James Willis, who was in town from Chicago. His check-in was uneventful, if long. He was booked to stay for a week, and it was right about at 1 week's time in November 19th that James Willis decided to end his life. His body was found curiously quickly by one of the hotel's maids about an hour after he expired. And from there, all of the usual machinations that go along with such things started to slide into motion. The hotel contacted the authorities, who investigated the scene and found several small white capsules near the body which they determined were poison. I don't know what poison. The papers of the time just say poison. And it was determined that Willis had knowingly ingested this poison in order to end his life. Case closed. Let's notify his next of kin in Chicago and get him back there for a proper burial. The only problem was that there was no James Willis from Chicago. At least not one that had been missing for a week. There was, however, a person, a Mr. Norton, who had been reported missing about a week ago from a far more local locale, that of Manhattan Beach. Police searched Willis's person once more and were able to locate several checks made out to a Mrs. M.C. Norton. And with that, James Willis was formally identified as William Kelly, or W.K. Norton of Manhattan Beach, whose occupation at the time of his death was listed as Christian worker, and M.C. was Mary Courtney, his wife. W.K. was originally born in India to missionary parents Albert and Mary Kelly. I know, it's a little confusing, Mary Courtney, Mary Kelly, but those are their names. Albert and Mary lived most of their lives in what would then be called Bombay, or present-day Mumbai, where they opened an orphanage which is actually still there today. I'm not sure under what capacity their son W.K. operated as a Christian worker, but we do know that his was the first of many recorded suicides within the walls of the Cecil Hotel. Maybe in the future we can talk about other mysterious deaths at the Cecil. I mean, famously there was Elisa Lam, the 21-year-old Canadian tourist who was found dead in the hotel's rooftop water tank, only after guests complained of brown water and foul-smelling showers. Accidental drowning ended up being the cause of her death, but like Richard Ramirez, enough has probably already been said about them. I'm not sure what I can add, but let me know if you're interested in hearing more about those things. Maybe a serial killers of Los Angeles road trip or something. I don't know. Let me know. It's worth mentioning that the Cecil Hotel today has embarked on a new life as affordable transitional housing for the unhoused in the area. So it seems its heart is in the right place, trying in its small way to undo the compounded damage in the surrounding area. Though, as I write this, the current tenants at the Cecil are embroiled in a battle with the owners over the conditions inside. It's not ghosts nowadays, but vermin like rats and cockroaches, as well as the unfettered drug use and mental illness that kept so many of its occupants on the streets for years, now being forced into close quarters with those who are just trying to make it back onto their feet. It's a fraught situation for sure, but I'll keep tabs on it and let you know if anything changes. Anyway, let's start making our way back home, shall we? It's a nice, clear day today, and we should have a beautiful sunset to look forward to on the drive back. I'll see you all next week, and I don't want to give anything away, but we will be meeting somewhere a little more rural next time, so wear sensible shoes. And, of course, drive safely. Between the Dial was written and produced by me, Daniel Watkins. If you can't get enough of me talking, or you just really like horror movies, and I feel like if you're listening to this, then you probably like horror movies, Christina Santa Cruz and I are still hosting horror movies every Wednesday in November on landturtlerecords.com. That's landturtlerecords.com. It's a project we're calling Monster Hump Day. It's a lot of fun, a lot looser than this, and I think you'll like it. If you like this, you'll like it. Anyway, if you want to follow me on social media, you can on Instagram. I'm Epcot Fitzgerald. That's Epcot_Fitzgerald. Have a good night, though.